Hi, everyone. Many of you know me as Mrs. Sposa, the English teacher at MBOT. What you might not know is that prior to becoming a teacher, and even when I was a teacher, I also was a New Jersey State emergency medical technician, and I volunteered with Norwood EMS. And on September 11th, 2001, I was a junior at Rutgers University. I woke up in the morning. It was a beautiful fall morning. I will never forget stepping outside. The air was like that first day of like crisp fall air. The sky was so blue. And I decided it was early in the semester. I didn't have much work to do. I'm like, I'm going to go to the gym in my building. So I went to the gym and I walked in. Everybody was glued to the TV. And I didn't really pay any attention because all the ellipticals were free. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go snag a machine. So I went up and I got on the machine and they had the Today Show on. And all of a sudden I see the World Trade Center on fire and I was like, oh, that's weird. And then all of a sudden I see the other plane come in and hit the World Trade Center. And I was like, oh my God. Got off the machine, ran back upstairs, woke my roommates up. One had already left for school. And we sat there, glued to the TV as everything was unfolding. And it was horrific. This was, pretty much before cell phones. Cell phones existed, but not nearly the technology we have today. I couldn't, even on a landline, couldn't call my parents. All the circuits were busy. I just wanted to get in touch with people, figure out what was happening. It was probably the scariest moment of my life. And I think that was the day that defined my generation. So I sat with my roommates, we watched the events unfold. And, after the towers crumbled and after the plane hit the Pentagon and after all the air traffic had been stopped, so we're talking hours into the morning, all of a sudden my building started shaking. And we all just ran out into the hallway. We didn't know where we were going. We ran. We got to the elevators and we just heard the rumble was insane. It was fighter jets. 4 fighter jets flew over our building. And to this day, when I hear a very loud plane, I tense. I get very nervous. It takes a lot for me to even get on a plane as a result of this day. But so I went back to my room. My phone was ringing. I finally got in touch with my parents, said, I'm coming home. I had spoken to my now husband, then boyfriend. He was already, en route to New York City, or so I thought. They ended up getting turned away and going to Giant Stadium. So as I'm coming home, I want to help. So my roommate, who was from the same area, we got in my car. The turnpike was closed, so we couldn't go that way. We ended up coming up 287, which is a much longer route to get to my house, which was in Harrington Park at the time. And we came to A7, and at one point there was a clearing. And the New York City skyline is iconic. And for my generation growing up, it was the Twin Towers that really defined that skyline. So, seeing just a billow of smoke where the Twin Towers should have been, we lost it. Just crying, very emotional. You knew the loss of life was extensive. It was just horrific. It was anything beyond anyone could dream. For my generation, it burst our bubble. It snapped us into reality. So, my roommate and I continued home. I went home. I got in touch with my now husband again. And he was like, listen, we're putting a bus together. Meet here, get on the bus, and it's going to bring you down to Giant Stadium. So I packed a bag. I brought an extra pair of clothes, deodorant, a toothbrush and toothpaste, and a granola bar. I don't know what I thought the granola bar was going to do, but I guess it made me feel better. I don't know. And I remember my mom standing on our front porch as I was getting in the car to go. Every time I went somewhere as a teenager, my parents was like, always be careful. When my mom said be careful that day, there was just a difference in her voice that I still, hear in my sleep, in my dreams. It was what I was going to do as I was going. I had to help. It was just what I did. So I eventually got on the bus. This was hours later. It was probably dinner time at this point. Everything had kind of settled somewhat from an emergency standpoint. I remember getting, down towards Giant Stadium, and it was like the scene out of a movie. All the cars were in park. You couldn't move. There was signs, the DOT signs that go over the highway. New York City is closed, turn around. New York City's never closed. It's the city that never sleeps. What are you telling me New York City is closed? People just in parks, sitting out of their cars on their hoods, just watching New York City burn. I remember there was an ice cream truck that was traveling on the turnpike and just giving out ice cream, because what else were they going to do with it at that point? So there was a line at the ice cream truck. There was no ice cream truck music. You know how, as a little kid, the ice cream truck music is so magical. Everything was just silent and everybody was just stoic. Everyone was in disbelief. We couldn't get through the traffic. The state police actually came out. We were on a big yellow school bus, probably one of the buses that you guys take to school every day. The state police came and escorted our bus into the Giant Stadium parking lot. And I remember pulling in, and again, things that I see in my dreams 20 years later. I remember the first thing I saw was a line of National Guardsmen with their automatic rifles strapped across their chest. And I was like, oh man, like what world are we living in now? And again, it was like being in a weird dream. Like, when you have those dreams where you can see everything unfolding, but you don't hear anything? That was my reality in that moment. I saw cops and EMTs and firemen and nurses and doctors and all sorts of trucks and equipment. I don't remember any noise. Everything was silent. And it was like I was living in slow motion in this silent movie. So the National Guardsmen, boarded the bus, wanted to see our identification, who we were, where were we going, who were we meeting. We got through there, and my husband got on. And as soon as I saw his face, I knew exactly what it was that we were up against. And, we got on the bus. It took us hours to get there. And he said, listen, I'm going to keep a few people to relieve the people who have been here all day, because they were there from like 10 o'clock in the morning. He's like, they're telling us we're getting busloads of patients. So we're staying. We don't know how long we're staying. But it's not good. The reality is that there were those who ran for their lives and got out, and there were those who didn't. And there was very little in between. So I was one of the ones that stayed to relieve the crews that had been there all day so that they could go home. And again, like I sat there for hours just waiting for patients, because again, that's what I was there to do. I probably responded to hundreds, if not thousands of incidents in my time as an EMT. This is the one that haunts me, that I think about every single day of my life. I did not see a single patient that day. And that sense of helplessness kills me, even 20 years later. The fact that, people survived or they didn't. There was a small group of people that were injured and were able to get out, and they were taken care of in Weehawken. They never even made it over to Giant Stadium. So we stayed for a couple more hours, and somewhere around midnight, 1 a.m., they terminated the operation, sent everybody home. And I remember getting back and my husband turning on the TV and watching the recap and seeing the planes hit, because he had been on calls the whole day. He hadn't seen the news. And watching his face experience that image for the first time, it was heartbreaking, and I know that you guys, were either too little or maybe even not even born at this point to have experienced that day. But I can tell you for certainty that that day defined my generation. And the images of that day haunt me. That sense of helplessness drives me even today to help others. And it just was the worst day of my life. It's hard for me to talk about 20 years later without getting choked up. It took me a long time to talk about this day, probably 10 years or so. And I try every year on September 11th to talk to my classes about my experience, because it's something that's worth sharing. So thank you for letting me share it with you guys today. I'm happy to talk about it if anybody wants to learn a little bit about what that day was like from a first response perspective. Please stop by and see me anytime. Thank you.